All right, bro. Let's rock and roll.
Wait.
So again, thank you for being on the call. Thoroughly appreciate it. We obviously got connected through my bro Miroslav,
Yep.
and I guess right off the bat, one of the first things that stood out to me, and like even that I can see from your background, of, like some of the things you got placed on your shelves there, is like you seem to have gone pretty deep on the path of magic. I saw on your website you've even got a program called Mage. There's a lot to do with runes as well. I'm
Yep.
curious, first off, because the whole intention for me around this season of conversations that I'm having with the brothers is around men's initiation. I can see that for people that may be new to this space or may not have a deeper understanding of it, they might hear magic and just think of like, D Disney movies that they watched when they were kids
Yeah.
or something like that. So can
Yeah.
you help to like carve out some context for people that are listening who might just brush it off as nothing and actually bring the intentionality into it of what that word means and how it relates to a man's path through initiation?
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you use the word initiation because the schools of magic that I have studied with call the act of pursuing magic initiation and
Right.
call like people on that path initiates. And so the whole idea of magic is initiation, right? And so it's like,
Got it.
well, what is initiation? So that's a massive conversation to have, but just to try to simplify what magic is from my perspective, it's kind of unraveling or realizing that we've kind of accumulated all these ideas and belief systems and ways of operating and patterns mostly unconsciously over the years. So we're born, we get kind of initiated into a way of operating in the world, and then we usually just continue that for the rest of our life and don't really question it. Whereas magic is it's a twofold process as I understand it. And the first
Hmm.
step is to notice your current operating system. It's like, cool, how do I think? How do I move? How do I like interact with others? What are my deep held beliefs? And then once you start to unpack all of that, you kind of evaluate whether that's actually beneficial for you, beneficial for the people around you on the greater whole, and if it's something you want to continue with. And if not, what do we do from here? Then start to recreate ourselves, refine what we're passionate about, why we're passionate about it, assessing our values, and then starting to rebuild ourselves from the ground up. So it's kind of like unraveling all the layers of self and then
Hmm.
recalibrating, remolding ourselves into something anew. And this is a cyclical process. So this happens, hundreds and hundreds of times throughout your lifetime. Everyone kind of does this who's doing self-development or initiation, right? Now,
Right.
the difference I think in what we perceive as magic is starting to use a symbolic form of communication to be able to interact with these more subtle layers of ourself and reality. And so what I mean by that is, everyone has affirmations, right? So it's like, yeah, I want to be stronger, or I want to be more disciplined, or I want to be this. And that works sometimes, but the thing is, our subconscious, or the like, anyone who has tried to start a new habit can attest
Hmm.
to this, being like, okay, I want to start getting up at 6 a.m. every morning and go do yoga, or I want to start eating differently, or I want to start this skill, right? And we all have this idea. And I think that's the first step to realize that, we may not be fully in control, because if we were, we would have infinite amount of skills and infinite amount of discipline, and we would decide something and we would do it. So something
Right.
else is happening there, right? And so a lot of people just know about this, but they don't really delve into it. And to me, it's like, okay, well, we want something, but something else is driving us. Isn't this something that we should like evaluate and look into? It just seems natural. Like, yeah, I really want to eat differently, but I've tried it and I can't. It's like, okay, well,
Right.
who's in control of you then? Who's in control of your life? And usually it's the subconscious in a particular way, in a model of understanding it. And the subconscious is kind of like a child in a lot of ways. you have to make it fun, you have to make it entertaining, and you have to use a lot of archetypal ideas and visualizations and things like that. And so through the use of magic, we can start to use things like earth and water and fire and wind and all these elements and these archetypal ideas that penetrate deeper into our subconscious, that we can start to use and utilize a new operating system and use
Hmm.
symbolic forms of communication. So like that might be runes, for example, is one of my first real uh languages. And it's like anything, when you learn a different language, you're learning to communicate in a different way. And magic is learning how to develop a language between either you and your subconscious, or you and the more subtle layers of being, or you and the universe. Because admittedly, I'm very skeptical. Like, I come from a very skeptical background. I didn't believe in any of this stuff until I started trying it out and things started happening. But there's definitely aspects to this which I don't fully understand. Like, it's not, for at least for me, a purely psychological process. There's
Hmm.
things that happen outside of me and connected to me that I don't fully understand. And if I'm honest, I hope I don't ever fully understand it, because I think, that's part of the allure of the game, because I don't fully
Right.
understand it. And I think that's why they call, the magic schools mystery schools, because we are tapping into this space in between. I feel like magic works where I'm not looking. So I might do a ritual or a manifestation for something, and then I'll look in this direction, wait for it to happen, and it'll usually, well, not usually, it always kind of comes from my blind spots. So there is an
Right.
aspect of magic eventually which taps into some mysterious intelligence that knows better than me or knows differently to me. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
it's
fascinating, man.
so hard to
It
summarize, but
I'm with you, and it speaks to, in some cultures they speak about the great mystery of life. And so to me, that begs the question of what's the relationship between that and initiation? And I guess at least coming from a Western world lens where it's so much structure through the mind and trying to analyze everything and label everything and understand everything, it leans into this notion that to be initiated is actually to have an appreciation for the mystery of life and to understand that you're not going to understand everything. Has that been what you found, given that like you started from a very skeptical place? I'm guessing you would have been looking to uh, have things clearly defined.
exactly. Yeah. Well, that last sentence, have things clearly defined, because I think so in school, well, at least I did, we learned to learn things and repeat it. These are
Right.
facts that you need to learn and then repeat back to me. And that is learning, that is progress. And from my experience, especially in the realms of mystery and spirituality, it's very abstract, and there's no, at least what I see, no innate truth. I guess that's like debatable, but it's working with things that are abstract and we all experience differently, but trying to find a system that we can all use and get similar results. And I think that's why, because, going to I've just been to one of your ceremonies and rituals, and I really appreciated the structure, because I've been to a lot of different rituals and ceremonies and things, and most of them are very new agey, kind of neo-tantric, and they,
Hmm.
I think, don't understand what it means to have a container held or what a ceremony is all about. And for me, the word ritual, right, has a lot of the information there if you really tap into it, right? So ritual, we think of something that repeats itself, something that we do over and over again and becomes part of our operating system. But then there's the ritual, which is also like a ceremony, right? But they're intertwined. For
Right.
me, doing doing a ritual, like, or doing a ceremonial ritual, because I come from a ceremonial magic background, which every action has a meaning. So we would, call in the the four directions, and there would be an element associated with each one. And then we would have sometimes ritual implements, and each one of them, every action meant something. and it was kind of
Hmm.
putting yourself into a trance state to shift into a another state to either receive information or to communicate information out, right? So that's kind of what's happening in a ritual to me. I'm opening myself up to receiving information, whether it's considered outside myself or from within, and then I'm also sending messages out. So it's a communication. But within that, it needs to be separated. Well, in my opinion, it needs to be separated from your current mundane life, right? So
Got it.
you designate a space to be otherworldly. And this is what I see because I've mainly studied Indo-European ceremonial magic, and also obviously the classical tantric framework. But what I see from just looking briefly into a lot of different traditions, and you could definitely expand on this, I'd love to know more about your lineage or ritual and stuff, is that seems to be the common ground. There's a designated space which is other. In order for something to be something, it also needs to not be something else. And so we dedicate a space to be otherworldly, and otherworldly so that things that normally don't happen in the normal world can happen. And
Right.
so, in order to really facilitate that, you need to be able to keep that otherworldly and not let things trickle in. And it takes a lot of practice, and it's a real art form. And that's why I have a lot of respect from what I've seen of what you do, man, to create and hold that space really, really well. But just seeing you like every action, like you were just watching every piece of your movement, everything was being held and everything was being kept otherworldly. And I think that's why mainly most of my ritual stuff for the first like I don't know 7 8 years was just solo because I could hold that space very well for myself.
Hmm.
And bringing that out into like to share that with people became really difficult because not only am I speaking about things that are abstract and symbolic, but I'm also trying to convince everyone to remain otherworldly and be as like into it as I am. And it's a
Right.
really, yeah, whole different art form than, magic as a solo practitioner. I can, put on a good show for myself and get into that trance state. But being able to do that for people who may not have that background of training, may not have that understanding, may not really be fully in it, it's really, really difficult. Um,
Yeah, I'm with you on that one, bro. I guess the short level high summary is it just comes down to good housekeeping in a world that's new to us, like it was for me. Like first time I stumbled my way through sacred spaces, I really like I didn't know what was going on, and so I did. I stumbled my way through because I wasn't into it because I was naive to it. It was new territory for me. I didn't know how to speak the language of the sacred, let's say, and uh, not even speak the language, but know the appropriate way to present myself in those
mm,
spaces. And it had to be a fascinating, long journey that I'm still very much on and loving the learning step by step. But I do agree with you. It's a very different element to the game when you open it to a group and when you're working with a group. And sometimes it can feel a bit like herding cats
yeah.
because like everyone's at a different level, right? And so it's how to make the experience palatable, how to hold a degree of discipline, and how to create a bridge for people that can't that aren't showing up because they don't even appreciate the beauty of the miracle that's before them
Mm,
because it's so new, right?
yeah.
And so we can't hold anything against anyone, especially if they're coming in naive, not knowing. It's about like how do we create a standard that works and that makes sense and that we can all fly with together and that we can glide with together because it's like one big chain, right? We're only as strong as the weakest link. And so,
Mm,
so how do we support each other around all of that? And it's a fine line. It's a fine dance, bro. I have a great time with because it's a constant discovery of like how do I make this a fun dance, maintain the reverence, not get like have no nonsense in the space, and ensure that we're focused on the mission and the task at hand, but we celebrate it.
yeah.
And to me, that's like the sweet spot right there. I
Yeah,
guess.
I love that you included the word fun because I think that's, there's like two opposites. Either people don't take it seriously or at least don't like appreciate the structure of things and like how everything's in integrated and linked, or people take it way too seriously and like are just so focused on all the things that need to be done and forget why you're doing it in the first place. And
Yeah.
you know, if we do go with that theory that magic and ceremony is trying to penetrate into the deeper parts of ourselves, and the subconscious does need it to be fun and entertaining. Because for me as well, like I have pretty good luck in general, but especially now because I've started to understand the process of when I want to do something, ritual for me is often committing to that. It's not necessarily like, you know, let's talk about manifestation magic. If I want to manifest something, it's not like I call it in and then I just sit on my ass and wait for it to happen. It's me
Right.
committing to this is what I want and I will do what I need to do to achieve that. And it's like a message out to the universe that this is where I'm heading. Please support me in any way you can, but I'm heading there. This is exactly where I'm going. And for me, it's making a commitment and like an oath to pursuing that as much as I can. And I think that people are chasing that peak experience with ritual and all that sort of stuff and don't want to actually do the work towards achieving things. And this is
I feel
something
like
that,
you touched on something super valuable with that, bro. Like, I guess there's two things that are alive for me. One is around that theme of fun and like language. I found especially in English, it's really easy for things to be misinterpreted. And for me, when I say fun, a more accurate expression would probably be joy. And because fun can be entertaining on a mental level, but we can be disconnected from it, right? Whereas joy is like that sincere, radiating warmth and expression that we
mm,
get, like when we see a child playing with their best friend or with like a little cat or a dog or just having a blast with life, right? So it's how do I have that joy where like I'm just riveted by life and inspired by the melody of this sweet dream that I get to experience and live. So have that
mm,
poetic experience to it, but not get distracted by it and not end up off with the fairies or in some kind of illusion about the reality that like, yeah, there's missions to do here and there's commitments and oaths that I need to be real with if I actually want to manifest anything worthwhile in my life. And I feel like what you just said, like I want to open it up to you for you to just dive into it, but I want to share a personal preview of like what I've just very recently experienced. I'm just lining up to do the launch for my book Soul Path, and thanks to my brother, I'm launching it in October. I was going to leave it until next year, but he just kind of gave me a bit of a nudge. And he's like, I reckon get it done before the new year. So
yeah.
I dialed in on that, looked at the timeline. I was like, sweet, I've got enough breathing space to make this happen. But as I've gone through it, and this is one of the big dreams of my life. So I wrote this book, like not to be a lead magnet for something or something like that. I was like, I want to write one of the masterpieces of my life and I want to put it out there. So that's what this book was for me. As I've leaned into it, I've probably had more challenge than any other project I've tried to launch along the way, where I saw the mind say like it's too hard, delay it, call off the event, 101 reasons not to do it. But then what's the reason for me to do it? Well, I said that I was going to,
Mm,
and I made that commitment. And no matter how many hiccups or hurdles come up along the way, I made an oath to myself. And at the end of the day, the only way to form myself as an individual, as a soul, as a person, is to see through on the commitments that I make as best as I
mm.
can. Whether it happens or how it happens, it's beyond me, right? But the controllables that are within my reach, it's like let me do everything I can to see these through. And that was something that really stood out to me, even on our voice notes before we jumped onto this call, where you spoke about oath. So I'd love for you to dial in more on that and speak to that some more.
Yeah, for sure, bro. Just quickly, I did want to mention something about what you were talking about joy, because I'm going to forget about it after, and it's just a
Yeah,
good
go for it.
segue. So in the runes, right? So the runes are essentially seen as all the elements of life in a very simplified version. But there's a rune called Wunyo, and it translates to the word joy. And
Right.
what I notice about joy, and when you were talking about joy, and all the examples you gave were forms of connection, right? And it's so interesting. Like I was just like, smiling when you were talking about it because it does feel very true for me as well. The word joy and the word like the rune Wunyo represents a very particular kind of joy is when everything's in harmony, and especially when you're merging together things that feel connected with some bigger purpose. And And I've noticed that even your wording, like in melody, right? In harmony, melody. And I've noticed when there's sharing circles and people use a word at the end of it, a lot of what they use is joy. It always comes up. And so yeah, it's
Right.
just I love that you I just want to say I love that you use that word joy. And yeah, just seeing how it connects, and it's interesting how you portrayed it as well. I just thought that was really cool.
Appreciate it.
Um, yeah, so in regards to making oaths, it's tricky because I freedom is probably my highest value. And so making an oath and a commitment that I have to stick with seems kind of, you know, counterintuitive to that. It's like, well, if I make a commitment, then I'm limited to what I can do. So I'm not free anymore. But it's, I guess, finding a balance between really knowing, I guess, how to word your oaths, right? So in Norse mythology, a lot of the characters, Odin and Loki, who are the main like culprits with making oaths, are always very careful about how they word their oaths. And so they always keep their oaths, but they're very particular about their wording. And so I have tried to refine over the years how I make my oaths and to make sure that what I'm saying is what I can commit to, but also leave room for in the wording for other things to happen that I may not expect. Because you've probably had like an experience where you want something and you start heading there, but along the way you evolve and change, and you may want things slightly different. So like, what are we supposed to do in that situation? Because
Right.
we've changed, and making an oath to a particular direction, you're going to change on that journey. And so by the time you get there, you're going to slightly want different things. So it is a tricky thing, and it's not like a make an oath, but yeah, in saying that as well, I think it's something that I see, especially in this modern spiritual new age world, super flakiness, uh, people committing to things. And I mean, I've been there. I've somehow committed to 17 yoga classes, 3 podcasts, and releasing a brand new course over the next week. And I have to pull it off because I've committed to it, but there's a big part of me that's wanting to try to, bail out of a few things or stuff like that. But in regards to the magical oaths, I think it's really important to understand that when you're making a commitment or an oath, your subconscious or a deeper part of you is listening. And so if I commit to doing something on a magical level and I don't follow through, there's a part of me that's going to know that. You know what I mean? It makes my magical ritual, it makes my oath making, it makes my commitments less potent, and I don't get as good results. And so
Mhm.
even just on a magical level, I try to be careful of what I commit to especially in a ritual format, because if I don't follow through with that, I will maybe get, bad results or something like that. Something, might happen, but more so, I'm not going to get as good results from the next one.
Yeah.
And so I'd love to like, because I feel like what I want to talk about is like covers a few things. So I'll probably go on a couple of tangents if that's all right, and come back to the idea
Yeah,
of
it's cool.
both.
Go for it.
So my introduction to magic and initiation kind of came at the same time I started getting into martial arts, and I think they're really interlinked because I grew up without a father, right? So we're going on a lot of tangents, but it's all connected. So my dad left when I was 5 years old. So I grew up with my mum and my sister, and I didn't really have a male role model to kind of model, right? And so I was drawn to stories and fantasy and video games to see these kind of archetypal models. And I thought that was enough. I thought that was like, I didn't really have any physical males in my life that I really looked up to until it came to about 21, 22, where I started doing like proper intensive martial arts. And it came
Hmm.
at the same time where I was trying to find spirituality in different ways, and I had started getting into magic. So I started dabbling in martial arts. I eventually went to a Tai Chi class with a teacher, and he asked me, he's like, "Do you want to learn proper Kung Fu?" And my friend introduced me to the class. And I was like, yeah, cool, that sounds fine. And he lived down the Gold Coast, so it was an hour and a half drive, right? So I drove down after work on a Friday afternoon, arrived at this beach, and there was about seven, including my friend, 7 people, including my friend there, and they were training. No one really like said hi to me or anything. No one really acknowledged me. The teacher, I walked up to the teacher and he said, okay, like, how bad do you want this? Like, do you really want to learn proper martial arts and proper kung fu and commit to this? And I was like, yeah, sure. I was kind of like, honestly, at that point, I wasn't really sure. It sounded like a cool idea. And
Right.
so he set me up with in a posture which is called horse stance, which is, kind of like it's like a squatting position, and set me
Mhm.
up and checked my posture. And it wasn't an extreme version, but it was enough to, after like 30 seconds to a minute of holding it, be uncomfortable. And he said, cool, that looks good. So he's like, stay like that for the next 2 hours if you want to train. And if you break your stance or if you move, you can go home. And I laughed and I thought he was joking. And I kind of looked around and everyone kind of, yeah, it was the initiation into
Yeah.
training. And so for the next 2 hours, I stood there and went through all of the things, all the doubts, all the wonderings if this is what I want. And eventually, yeah, I made it through the 2 hours. And
Solid.
that has, like, it really changed me. So in a lot of different ways. So at that point, I can't say if I didn't do that, if I would have continued to train. But I feel like because I earned it and because I had to work for it and I had to, and after that, like they all congratulated me. It's like they must have had a lot of people come and go. And so those other students, that small group of students, didn't really even acknowledge me until I had passed that initiation, passed the test. But one thing that I think people misunderstand about initiation, or at least from my perspective, is that was the start. Like once I'd done that, he said, okay, cool. Now we can start. Now we can begin training. Now we can start the process. And then I was welcomed into the group, and then the work actually started. But a deeper part of myself wanted it more because I feel like I'd overcome a deep part of myself. I'd use my sheer willpower to overcome that threshold. And that is, you know, really something that I've been trying to find and recreate in different ways, because for me, initiation is about making it difficult enough that not everyone's going to do it, but obviously not making it unnecessarily hard where there's no real meaning in what you're doing. And that horse stance also connected to every other part of the training to go further as well. And at that point, that was really the first time that I had a masculine role model that I really looked up to, that was both, kind and gentle enough that I really like had that camaraderie with, but he was also scary enough and intimidating enough that I like didn't want to mess with him. And at 21, I was like smoking weed all the time. I was drinking all the time, partying all the time, a little rat bag, just getting into trouble. So I used to just get into like drunken fights and stuff with my friends. Since that, I haven't been in one fight since that. It's so funny to think about that before I started doing proper martial arts, I used to just get into stupid little things. But from then onwards, that really started something that I yeah, I think a different view of what initiation was. And then, so to circle back to the magical aspect, when I started delving into different magical paths, I realized that just like martial arts, you can't really do everything at once because some of them conflict with each other. For example, that form of martial arts that I was doing at the time, Chen Kung Fu, was all circular movement, right? So it was a system of movement that kind of synced together to achieve a certain goal, which is obviously disabling your opponent. But different forms of martial arts contradict, and the analogy I use, right, is imagine you've got two guys who are about to fight in an arena. You've got one guy who's done a year with a sword, a year with a spear, a year with a trident, a year with like an axe or something like that. And
Right.
he's got like 4 years of training, maybe five years of training with different weapons. And then you've got one guy who's just done 3 years of training with a sword. And so you put these two people in the arena, and naturally you think the guy who's trained 3 years with the sword is going to win. But the other guy doesn't even get to pick his weapon. He gets struck down, before he even decides which weapon to pick.
Right.
It's so like he would have won anyway, the guy with the 3 years, in my opinion. But it's not overloading yourself with different systems, because when it comes down to it, you only really need one to get the job done. And so I think starting off with one solid system of understanding is a really important place to start, and it's something that not many people do these days. So the reason why I'm using this is I think martial arts has become such a deep metaphor and understanding for me of magic and of initiation and of spirituality in general, because in spirituality we don't see a clear goal a lot of the time. In martial arts it's very clear. It's like, cool, if what you're doing is working, you should be able to move, disable your opponent, and also it should be nourishing for your body and not destroy your body in the process, right? That's kind
Right.
of a clear-cut goal. Whereas in spirituality, it's like, what are we trying to achieve here? And it's easy to just dabble in different systems. So like, cool, I'm going to take a bit of the Egyptian stuff, I'm going to take a bit of the Greek, and I'm going to take a bit of like, yoga, and then I'm going to mix it with, maybe some Chinese stuff, and just throw all these cool ingredients together into a soup and be super spiritual, right? And how would anyone know any difference? Or how would you even know that what you're doing isn't necessarily beneficial because there's no clear goal? But if you're working with one particular tradition and understanding, why are we doing ritual? What is ritual as a whole? What are we trying to achieve here? Like, what are the benefits of all these kind of things together? And then you have an understanding of how a coherent system feels,
Hmm.
and how it actually gets results in your life. Because, circling back to the peak experiences idea, we just want to have these like amazing plant medicine journeys and these like kundalini awakenings and these intense breath works, and we want to feel something. But after that, is it translating into changing your default way of operating? Because if it's not,
Yeah.
you might as well have just like, to me it's the same as just having a good party. Like, it's to go out and get wasted and have a great night. But if it's not changing your default operating system and changing how you operate on a day-to-day basis, then it's not really changing anything. You're not really doing magic, in my perspective. And so to come back, circle all the way back to the oath, I think it's, for me, starting to get a clear understanding of why I'm doing these particular things, and committing to a particular way of operating and a disciplined practice, because that's really the only way you're going to grow, that then gives you more ability and freedom in all avenues. Because, as I said before, that freedom idea, when I thought that discipline was going to hinder my freedom,
Yep.
having a disciplined practice now enables me to have more freedom in my body. Like a discipline like physical practice, I can do more things with my physical body. A disciplined meditation practice can enable me to make more decisions proactively rather than reactively, and to have more decisions in any situation. I can have more decisions on how I want to operate longer term. And to me, a lot of that understanding of self comes from the blind spots, and it comes from delving fully into at least one big coherent system. I don't know if that made sense, but it's like so many pieces around it. Uh, yeah, they're all kind of coalescing.
Yeah, I'm with you, bro. It made sense, and like props on opening the loops and closing them the way that you did. I respect that. I've got a couple of questions for you, where I feel like there's a lot of value that we could unpack. I mean, first thing right off the back, there's the overarching theme of what we've been speaking about here, or what you've been sharing, is that theme of discipline, right? And the notion that, as the age-old saying goes, freedom comes from discipline.
Mm,
And so I love it, like how you demonstrated that in your own life. And I found that as well, right? Like there's a certain expression of freedom at the level of I'll just do whatever, whenever. But there's a completely different expression of freedom at the level of showing up as what I term an initiated man. Or this is, relevant for men or women. that are making commitments to their lives and seeing through on them, because life reciprocates to us in new ways. So I love that. What I wanted to kind of explore with you first is you spoke about the importance of understanding why I'm doing this. I know I've seen quite a bit in let's use the umbrella term, like the conscious circles that exist out there, that people have this sense of I'll just go along and I'll find out, I'll see what happens,
Mm.
right? And I found that not to be the most valuable way to present oneself, because it's kind of like just flicking channels on a TV screen, just like let me see what movie's on, right? Like what's going to be entertaining tonight.
Yeah.
And so where's the balance there for you that you strike when asking of yourself for that clarity? Because if it becomes too intellectual a process, it starts to strip away at the magic, right? And what we can experience
Mm.
and how we approach this. So for me, there's a sense that there's a fine line there of what where one needs to strike to have the clarity and the understanding of like, cool, this is what I'm about and why I'm stepping into these spaces and why I'm putting myself through these initiations, through these ceremonies, through these rituals, whatever they may be.
Yeah.
And how do you toe the line?
Yeah, it's something I'm still trying to work out, and something that I initially had a lot of issues with because everything has the light and the shadow, and the light of our day and age is we've got access to information which not only like would we be living in one part of the world and not be exposed to all these different ideas from different cultures and different parts of the world, but also just having ready access to things that sometimes people would have to dedicate years of what I call sweeping the floors, like doing the groundwork to even get access to.
Yeah,
And where we've readily got access to information that it's funny because we don't appreciate it because we've got ready access to it. It's like the horse stance thing, right? If he offered to teach me straight away, would I have dedicated a lot of my time to it? And I don't know how to answer that. So I guess the issue that I found initially was, do I want to do the Hermetic magic, like the Greco-Roman Egyptian magic style? Do I want to delve into the runes? Do I want to go like the medieval Catholic grimoire magic? Or actually this stuff sounds really cool as well.
right.
Uh there's just so many different paths to go down. And I, more than anyone, I feel, get FOMO massively. Like if even though I love the runes or love what I'm doing, I wonder if I'm missing out. And I am like, I have to accept that I'm not going to be able to do everything
Hmm.
at once. And so the way that I do it now is I try to logically understand what is the most obvious thing that's going to benefit me if I continue, but then rewarding myself by maybe dabbling in other things. And so, for example, because I've been really delving into the tantric path, I had to stop myself from doing any rune work because the runes were obviously my default, the way of operating, but I really needed to, like, for a solid few years, just go deep into the classical tantric framework. And now that I've done that, I can come back to the runes in new ways and new understandings, but
Yeah,
trying to reward myself in different ways because, yeah, they call it being a what was it? So an occultist called it like being a squirrel, like bouncing from the easy branch to easy branch. And what
right.
usually happens is we dabble with something for a little bit, and then as soon as it starts to become a bit difficult, or we have to actually start doing stuff and working with it, we get bored and bounce on to the next thing. And so we never really go
Right.
deep in any aspect. And what you were talking about, I think before, like about, can't remember how you're wording it, is what something in occultism we call an armchair occultist or an armchair magician or an armchair practitioner, someone who reads a lot of things and knows a lot of things but hasn't really done it. And there's a
Right.
quote that I really like is magic works best when you do it. And it's something that a lot of people misunderstand. They'll read a book about something and think that they know it, but it's not until you actually do it, get your hands in the dirt, like so to speak, and do it, that you really have an understanding. And I think it's threefold. I think like you learn about it, get the theory, and then you go and practice it. and then you kind of evaluate your understanding of it and then come back to the theory with fresh eyes, and you're like, oh wow, I don't remember reading that before, but now that makes sense, I'm going to try that. And you go back to the practice, and then you're like, oh, actually that's really weird, I didn't think that way before. And then you come back to the theory, and that's kind of
Yeah.
how I learn anyway. And I think the process of initiation works. So theory, practice, and then subjective synthesis. And it's like this triangle of like cycles. Like, do you have a similar perspective on it, or?
Yeah, yes, and I feel like there's also space there to speak to the the notion of there's like actively engaging in initiation, the way that you're speaking about it, and then there's also when initiation is brought on us by life, and whether that's because we've been in some theme of avoidance, whether
Mm,
that's because we were busy working on a business, in a relationship, like whatever the reason was, doesn't matter. I do feel like we all have a calling at the level of the soul, or however you want to interpret it, that makes it clear and obvious to us that we should go through some kind of transformational process, some kind of initiation,
yeah.
and that perhaps we don't all well at scale. I'd say that in the modern world, we don't allow ourselves the freedoms and the possibilities of how to do that, partly from a lack of education and understanding that this is actually really important and this is the foundation of knowing our essence and
Mm,
how we stand in life. And secondly, because it's not easy to access stuff that is rooted in foundation through a Google search. Like you actually have to go travel around. You have to go meet people. All right. You're not going to see a flashy Instagram reel that's necessarily going to, you might, but you might just come across hybridized expressions of spirituality, initiation that aren't founded in something truly sustainable. And that speaks to kind of like what you were speaking about before, right? That there's all these different systems, and there's the danger of flashy object syndrome, of jumping around to all the different systems.
mm,
But there's also the danger of engaging with systems that are deeply rooted in tradition, in culture, in lineage. And when we do that, we may not see the manifestations in life, right? And we might find ourselves spinning in circles rather than getting the feedback that you were speaking about and saying like, cool, here's where I was, here's the process I engaged in. I can actually see the change in my life now. And I say this from direct experience. Like I had exposure to a few different like ceremonial circles, plant medicine circles in my early days of initiation, let's call it, which was about a decade ago now, where I was naive to it. So I didn't know that I was in an environment that wasn't necessarily founded on like clear lineage. Like there was a bit of a blend of things. I'd call it like a hybridized, modernized expression. And the danger of that, like what manifested for me was life started to get more confusing.
mm,
And what I later learned just through direct experience was that actually, like, if I'm doing this, life is supposed to get clearer, and I'm supposed to know what I'm manifesting, how I'm creating, and I'm supposed to be and ever find a relationship with creation, with the
mm,
laws of creation, with those laws of the universe. So it was only once I got clarity on that I was like, ah, okay, here's someone that I can work with who has lineage that's been around forever and a day. And if I follow in the footsteps of what their elders taught them, then life will start to make sense. And I saw that through my direct experience. You know, sometimes people ask
mm,
me like, how do you know? Because it's undeniable. Like your life physically, tangibly manifests differently.
yeah.
And I feel like within that, the circle that we've been speaking in has been oaths. And one of the big revelations for me was really when I went from the idea of like, I'll just go do a ceremony or I'll go away for a weekend to making longer form commitments of saying, you know, like I'm gonna go vision questing. And vision questing is typically a 4-year process. So it's not
Mm,
like I just go do this thing one time and I'm done. Like I check the box and that's it. No, I'm actually in a process for 4 years and I'm studying that process for 4 years and witnessing how my life is manifesting through it. And the importance that I see around commitment and oath there is like I've met a lot of people over the last 4 years and frequently heard the thing of like, oh yeah, like I did it for 2 years, but then like I decided to give it a break for a year. Well, hold on, you made a commitment, right? Like the purpose of the commitment is that I will weather the storm however it shows up, not
mm,
I'll do this provided it's convenient, right?
yeah.
And I feel like that's where the most valuable teachings come from. And that's why I love so much of like you've spoken to I frequently use the word commitment, but it's only since like our chats that like I've been reminded of the word oath and just how valuable it is, and to recognize that like yeah, that is what we're creating there when we decide in these ways. And
Yeah.
ultimately, like the big value that I found from it and that was shared to me from some elders was especially in these spaces of magic, of ceremony, of lineage, of initiation, that if we make an oath, the importance to see it through, because we're essentially making a declaration to the universe saying that I am this person and I'm going to do this. And that's what gives us the mirror image on ourselves, right? So that when we look at the sky, we can see ourselves in a clear way. And the importance around seeing these commitments through so that that clarity can be maintained. Because otherwise, like we've cast one thing out there saying, I am this thing, but then we've done something else. And then there's a disharmony there that can sometimes take years to regulate and to bring back into a center point.
Yeah. Yeah, and you touched on so many good points there that I want to talk about. But in just one little thing, in some traditions, so what you talked about lineage is I completely 100% agree with, but it also makes some traditions hard to be able to do that with. For example, in the Nordic runic tradition, we only
Hmm.
have tiny little scraps of information about how things worked. Like, for example, everyone's heard of the runes, everyone understands the 24 runes, that we do rune readings and all that sort of stuff. They have these names. There's only one single piece of evidence that we have about how to do rune readings, and it's from Tacitus, who wasn't even, he was talking about visiting these Germanic tribes, and he talked about seeing staves on a stick being thrown down on a white cloth. That's all we have about rune readings. Doesn't even necessarily
Right.
say they're runes. And so how do we build a tradition out of that? And so we have to piece a lot of things together. And so the way I see it is we've got all these like body parts, right? Trying to piece together a full body, and we're missing a lot of pieces and organs. And so what we then have to do is, because we don't have the organic or the natural parts left, we have to borrow from other bodies or other traditions. And so, for example, my main tradition for the last like 13, 14 years has been with the runes, but it's really tricky to say that I have a lineage because so much of it is pieced together by practitioners and scholars, and we're still trying to piece it together. And what you were talking about oath, and the reason I went on this is a lot of it is comes from the mythology. And so
Mm.
in the mythology, when they talk about oaths, it was actually became the highest value. So if someone made an oath in the mythology, usually they were bound to it tighter than they were to even family. And so if you make an oath to someone, that is actually a higher value than even your own immediate family or anything else. Like that is like your whatever you say, if you make an oath, like that is your highest priority. And so it's interesting to see through mythology and stuff like that where the values lie.
Yeah.
And it's so tricky. So in Tantra, it's been nice to see exactly what you spoke about, of an unbroken tradition that has, we're so lucky. Like we have so much information on classical tantric ritual practices, and we've only transcribed like 5% of the Sanskrit pieces. So there's so much available, right? So we have
Right.
like vast amounts. On the other side of it, you've probably like heard of Norse mythology, and does
Yeah.
it seem to you that there is a lot of information about Norse mythology?
Look, I don't know a heap about it. I've like peripheral information at the most. It doesn't seem like there's a lot around it. And in what you're speaking about like needing to piece it together, I guess there's a couple of things that are worthwhile speaking to. So for me, there's an understanding that like from the lands where I'm from the Balkans, where I was born, there was once upon a time ago, uh, pagan rituals that were probably steeped in heavy traditions, right? But it's been some 2,000 years since the influence of the church on those lands. So there's
Yep.
2,000 years of memory lost, and there's incredible value in stepping into a lineage that is really clear, well maintained, where there's instruction that you can follow, and you can go through the infinite degrees of ascension, right? to learn about those landscapes, those dimensions within yourself and your environment, that would then when you take it back to something like the runes, like you're speaking about, you can look at it with new eyes and like you see the clarity, right? Because now you've seen a clear model and you go, huh, all right, cool. Like pennies start to drop, right? So
Exactly, bro. Like exactly.
the piece that I feel is important to speak to is around like why is stuff being brought in, right? So there's one side which is, hey, like we've actually lost information here, so we have to figure
Mm,
this out. And there's another piece which is convenience. Like I'm just not going to do what the traditions did because I think I'm more intelligent or because I've had a new idea or something like that. And for me, that's where it can get a little bit slippery. And it can seem like we're doing a really good thing and the idea can seem really great. But for me, if there's a lineage and a way to connect with the divine that's been laid out, like we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like it's all already there for us. The blessings of that is like generations upon generations of observational study, more than
mm,
what anyone can do by themselves. So I feel like, at least from what I've witnessed, there's an invitation for, in some spaces, for that aspect of humility to actually sit back and realize like we don't have to be doing so much. I feel like it's this westernized approach of like let me do more, let me add more, where like the thing's complete. I don't need to add
mm.
to it except for with my heart and my devotion, right? But and
Yeah.
then there's that other side of the conversation where there is traditions that have been, I'm going to rephrase it, from lost to forgotten, because for me, what I've come to understand is on what I mentioned about where I'm from in the Balkans, is that the information is scribed in the land. It may not be in books and it may not be in movies, it may not be on YouTube readily available, but to he who's willing to go and spend the time in quiet observation, like the information is there.
Yeah.
It just takes longer to unpack and to understand. And so that's like something that I'm curious about because I feel like there's a purpose to why I was born where I was born when I was born.
Yeah.
And while I'm unpacking that and getting to know it, I'm making sure I'm keeping myself in good stead and integrity with my practices and my devotion through lineages that are maintained, thankfully, and that are willing to receive me, even though I'm not originally from those places. And I
Yeah.
feel like the overarching theme that's important to speak to is that all paths lead to home, right?
Yeah.
They're all going to get us there in one way or another. And that's one thing that I've had the blessing of witnessing when I've been in the presence of elders from different lineages and traditions. When they meet and they come together, there's a recognition for me that there's more likeness than there is separateness
Mm.
or
Yeah.
dislikeness.
100%. Yeah, you touched on so many good things there. And yeah, there is a lot of overlap. Like I'm a big history nerd and I love studying the history of different cultures and traditions. And, even because we don't think of it, but there's like astrology, right? And then there's Vedic
Right.
astrology, but it's Vedic astrology exists because Greece was trading with India and there's so much overlap. Like I won't go into it because that would be another whole tangent, but I
Right.
really like I really try to push people to look at the history of things because there is so much overlap. For example, when I was in Croatia, I was in Split and I ended up chatting to a guy who was working at he was just working at the bar or something. He was on his break and we got chatting and he asked about the runes that I had tattooed. And he's like, "Oh, I my family has runes." And I was like, "What do you mean? Like, do you like is your family into runes?" And he's like, "No, there's actually a book that my dad gave me and his grandfather gave to him, and they have their own family rune set, right?" And that's the thing as well, because rune literally translates to mystery, and it's just a language of communication. And so
Right.
we often think of a tradition as this one unbroken line, but usually it's scattered branches and all this stuff. And like even Hinduism, we think of one coherent tradition, but it's all different individual folk practices. And the same thing happens in like Celtic and Nordic European practices. We think it's like, Norse mythology is all this one unbroken, everyone had Odin, everyone had Thor. And that
Mhm.
wasn't the case at all. Like everyone more so had their own family deities, family gods, their own, like they really connected with the land spirits, like the spirits of nature, the household spirits. And then they usually had their own rituals and magical practices. Like this guy from Croatia, his family had their own rune set, which they would
Right.
probably use for different things. And it's exactly like you said. So, you know, when I first started getting into the runes, so, I obviously won't go into what the runes are, history too much about it, but essentially there's 24 runes of the Elder Futhark, which are the oldest set that we have information about. And they are very mysterious, but they are said to represent the whole of reality, right? So there's like 24 concepts that represent generally the whole of reality. And when I
Right.
started learning the runes, I noticed that some of the runes were very similar to each other. And I was like, these people don't know, they have no idea. I know better. I don't need this rune. I don't need this rune. But they were my blind spots, right? Exactly what you were talking about before.
Right.
We often think we know better. We get that whole Dunning-Kruger effect where we learn the basics of something and we think we've got it. And not only do we think we got it, we often think we know better than the tradition. And so we scrap and get rid of bits and pieces. But if you stick with it, like you were talking about, and humble yourself and be like, actually, maybe these people who pass these practices on for hundreds or thousands of years may have something. I may not understand it now, but maybe that's the process of initiation, seeing my blind
Yeah.
spots. And then eventually, yes, once I fully understood the runes and how they related to reality, I could see that the ones I dismissed earlier were things that I really needed to work on because I didn't fully understand that in my own life. And so I couldn't get a full picture of the full spectrum of reality. And yeah, so it's just tricky because in certain traditions they have been hybridized. And in my experience with the rune school, like it is a hybrid. And because like as I was going to briefly mention before about Norse mythology, all pretty most of the information, say 80-90% of the information we have about Norse mythology now
Yeah.
comes from one book that was found in a pile of cow dung, cow shit. So
Wow.
it's so funny because the Icelandic king at one stage got really interested in the history. This is after it had been Christianized. Like, you know what? We're Christian, but we're from a pagan ancestry. I'd love to know more about it. I'll give gold to anyone who can find me books. And so
Right.
everyone went door knocking, and then they knocked on a farmer's door and said, "Oh, do you have any books?" And he's like, "Oh, just check in the barn." And they found in a pile of shit, they found a book that has about like most of what we know about Norse mythology came from this one book.
Wow.
Because
There's an interesting metaphor in that.
100%, yeah, exactly. And because they were written on cow skin and sheep skin and stuff, and through like winters they would eat that for the protein. And so it was like, okay, this book is really cool, but if I don't eat something, I'm gonna die. So they would
Right.
it's so funny. Like we romanticize these ideas, right? But really, like we're missing a lot of information. Yes, because the church wiped out a lot of the information and converted people from paganism, etc. But also because they ate all their books. Like it's funny to think back, and that's why I think history is really useful because it can see how like everything has been connected and overlap, and it branches out and comes back together. And so to circle, I think it's just an important part to note about the initiation because, again, I agree with you so much about staying with the tradition that has been around for a long time because it's obviously worked in a particular way. But I'm also anti-traditionalism just for the sake of being traditional because I think things naturally evolve and change, and that can be beneficial. And again, for a martial arts analogy, my current Wing Chun teacher got exiled from one of his schools because he found gaps in the system that didn't work in particular ways. And when he questioned that, the response was, "How dare you question this tradition? We like it. This was taught to me this way, so you have to learn it this way." And from what he's shown me, like he was right in questioning that because he showed me how it was taught and how it is taught now, and as he's evolved it, and it didn't work. And it's easy to see that, I guess, more in a martial arts perspective, but in a tradition like this, it can be tricky.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's like a
I'm
balance.
I'm with you, bro. The thing to highlight for me in what you said was that perhaps the stuff I'm dismissing is where my initiations are,
Mm,
right? So when I spoke to that, it was about that stepping too soon, too quickly into spaces that we don't know enough about. It's
yeah.
a different thing with the in the context of the example that you gave. of like you're speaking about a Chun master who's been through it himself, who's taught countless students, who's gotten the feedback of all that experience and all that teaching, and realized, hey, there's actually an opportunity to improve here. That's genuine, sincere, that's going to give people a better result from what's being done.
Yep.
But in a world of where it's easy for people to call themselves ceremonialists, I feel like the Instagram thing at the moment is for someone to be a priest or a priestess or something like this, right? And to start running ceremonial experiences and then to just create things out of thin air. And when done through an uninitiated lens, can be quite dangerous, right?
Yep.
So that's what it was about for me. In like when spaces like this have been created, that they're done in good stead, in good integrity. And
Yep.
like I've even been in spaces where like from traditions that have the lineage and everything, and they say like, yeah, sometimes we change things, but like we really thought about it before we made a change.
Yeah.
It,
Mm.
it, it it wasn't like a spur of the moment. Let's flip a coin and like choose left or right, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So that was like the context piece around that is super important. Before we continue, I just want to check how are you with time?
Yeah, I'm good, man. Yeah.
Good,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there's a theme that of something that you spoke to earlier that I'd love to unpack a little bit, which was I wrote down mapping out initiation. So you spoke about the theme of your horse stance example, and the like that wasn't where it started. In relationship to initiation and like how we create relationship with it, there's a theme of essentially exploring how we can map out for people stepping into these spaces that are listening to this, the process of initiation, because there's absolute significance in the moment, in the night, in the process that someone goes through, but that's not all the significance either. And there's
Mm.
the before and there's the after. And so I'm curious if you can speak to, like if you want to keep running with that example, you use a different one in your own experience of what do you mean by that? But you say like this isn't where it starts, and what does it actually mean? Like I've just stepped through a doorway. Now what?
Mm. Yeah, exactly. And that's a really good question to ask because I think that's what maybe keeps people from committing to things because I guess maybe in ye old days, if you were training with a master, you knew that they knew their stuff because there wasn't as many people who were just like, I guess, charlatans, just, made a really good Instagram profile and told everyone that they know how to do stuff. You would know that this person knew their stuff, so you would have confidence in committing to that path. But now it's so tricky. Like, what about is this coach going to deliver what I I need? And so yeah, what does make so how do you know if what you're committing to, if your teacher, if your mentor or master is going to deliver on something that is going to be beneficial to you long term? And it is like a really tricky question. So I guess for me, and I can use this as my example of, so I've only made an oath to one school, like school of thought, and that is a school called the Rune Guild. And that was when I decided that I really wanted to pursue the runes. And there was a couple of like mystery schools that I was interested in. And the benefit, so some mystery schools, you have to basically make an oath and commit to this before you even really get to understand what they do. And for me, that was like, I'm not going to commit to something I don't really understand, I haven't got a taster of. Whereas the Rune Guild, it actually gave you their whole curriculum for like $20. You could buy the book, $20, get the whole curriculum. And they're like, cool, this is the basics of a curriculum. Before you apply to join our school, we want you to actually show us and demonstrate both in a written like thesis form, but also a practical application of how you've implemented it and how it's improved your life. And this curriculum alone, before you even apply for this school, can take you anywhere from 1 to 4 years. So it took me about 3 years to get through this curriculum just to apply at the school. And already in that 3 years, my awareness of my patterns, like one of the things they get you to do early on is they get you to map out all the parts of your personality that are both benefiting you and hindering you. And man, if you haven't done that before, like that's really confronting. But then what they get you to do is then map a way to connect with that. So like each part of your personality. So like your focus, your ability to focus could be connected with to this rune Isa, right? And then you're using techniques to be able to tap into that aspect of focus and then to move away from the parts that are hindering you. And this is just one small part. Like that alone, that practice could be done for the rest of your life, but this was one small part. And so what I did for that 3 years, I learnt about the school, I did the curriculum, I did all the practices, I wrote like a thing. And what you had to do to get accepted, you had to get the awareness of a master. So they have masters in the school. You have to get their attention. You have to show that you've been working with it. Then you have to actually go and meet them. And this person that I'd chosen to be my master in the school was on the other side of the world. So I then had to go on like a bit of a pilgrimage. And so he was on the Isle of Man. So this is like a tiny little island in between England and Ireland. And so I made a whole like pilgrimage to go see all the runic sites like in Sweden, like, and I visited like lots of Europe. And then after I got accepted, I then had to design my own initiation ritual based on my understanding of the curriculum. And so they give you a kind of example. So what I did, I went to this park where I grew up, where I started doing my first magical practices. And there's this poem in the Norse Eddas which talks about like hanging from a tree and like falling back and then getting back up like refreshed, essentially. It's Odin's rune telly. And so I kind of did a ritual where I hung from somewhere and I let go and dropped onto my knees, which like physically hurt really badly to the point that like I knew it was going to be hard to get up. But then I actually, even though I was in pain and my knees hurt for like weeks after that, I know it sounds stupid, but and to anyone who hasn't done this sort of stuff before, it's like, what are you doing? This is stupid. But for me, it was like enough of a physical, emotional shock, and like I had to use my willpower to get back up and walk off. So that ritual for me was not just that ritual, but that ritual of that evening of me falling down and having to get up and walk away new wasn't the thing that initiated me. That was my own recognition of the last 3 years that I
Nice.
dedicated to this. And that was just the next step. And so I'm working towards my mastery in this school. I've been with this school for about probably about 12 years now. And I'm not even a master yet. Like maybe ideally in the next 5 years, I will attain my mastery. But who these days like really commits to like 15 years of an apprenticeship? And it's just like a whole different game. Like, and it's my choice that it took so long. There are some people in the school that have achieved that in like 5 years, but still
Hmm.
like 5 years of intense work. And so, like to circle back to your question, like what is initiation to me, or how can you tell what is a good school or what is a good teacher? I think an example of the initiates of that school are a good example. Yes, humans are human and we all have our flaws, but an example of that school is a representation of that school. And if that person is what you would consider someone you'd want to be like, then that's a good example. But also trying out, like if someone's putting something behind a paywall and being like, you have to, commit and submit yourself to our great school and pay a gazillion dollars, like I think you should be able to try something. Like I'm all for paying good money for things because I think, you can do 2 hours of horse stance, or you can sweep the floors for 6 months, or you can pay a lot of money. All of these things are still a threshold to get over. But I think to know if it's a good school or not is to see examples of the students of that school or masters of that school, and to also be able to work through part of their curriculum. And I think the last part of this, which like a lot of what you've talked to about this is has been said, but I think is really missed, is actually having a curriculum. Like I want to like yell this, but I see so many like even men's circles, right? It's like go to this nice men's circle and we all chat
Hmm.
and we all have a great time and we feel good, and then we go home to our our regular lives with no plan, with no way to implement what we've just talked about, and no day-to-day curriculum. Like the curriculum that I did through both my martial arts training and the Rune Guild has stuff that you can do every day. The book, it has a plan for the next 4 years for you of stuff to do every day. And like I didn't do that every day. Like I'm a human. I have days off, I have weeks off, I have months off.
Hmm.
It doesn't mean like because my kung fu teacher told me that I need should be doing 2 hours of horse stance every day. I didn't do it every day, but I did something every day. It's like having this
Right.
this ideal version. Maybe once a year I did my 2 hours again to just prove to myself that I could. But most of the time I did my half an hour every day. And
Right.
it's like in an ideal world, this is what you'll do every day for your like initiation for over the next few years. But because you're human, just maybe do this or just do this and this. And yeah, so I think what's really missing for me in a lot of initiation circles, whether that's men's initiation or generally anything, is not seeing the one event or the ritual, the ceremony as the thing like that initiates you and creates, gives you the power, gives you the thing. That is just like a flag of like um acknowledging certain rites of passage or certain changes or certain stepping stones,
Right.
but all that is completely arbitrary, is completely pointless unless you've got like consistent work to build that around. And so I also think it's really not for everyone. Like I'd like to believe that every human should be doing some kind of initiation, but I think the truth is from what I've seen, most people just don't have the desire to do it. Um, yeah, hopefully
Yeah.
that answers.
Could be said that initiation is for everyone, but not everyone is for initiation.
I like that. I like
Yeah.
that.
And so I want to highlight something else because I'm thoroughly appreciating from these conversations that like I'm looking at what are the interesting things to speak to that aren't spoken to, like in the in-between of the dialogues. And you spoke to something really valuable, which was that there's a threshold to overcome, whether it's a financial commitment, whether it's a time commitment, whether it's, like there's some kind of threshold to overcome as a means of recognizing where the initiation lies for us, and not to shy away from it because of it, but recognizing that that's part of the process.
Yeah.
And with everything else that you said, of course, as being a mode of selecting the path that we choose. Bro, this has been super valuable. Thoroughly appreciate it. For people that are curious about connecting with you, finding out more about your work and what you're offering, what's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, I mean, you can find me on Instagram, Daniel Arulian, so Erulian. Otherwise, ritualembodiment.com is my main website. So I run 200-hour tantric yoga teacher training, which is a hybrid. Obviously we delve into classical tantric ritual and framework, but it's also a lot of modernized yoga mixed in. I have a course like that you mentioned called Mage, which really delves into tantric elemental magic, but again hybridizes it with modern occultism and what I've learned. But my flagship program, which has been in the works for far too long, is going to be released next year, which is called Gulda. And Gulda is essentially magic from the Norse runic framework. And it's funny how the things that are so dear to us that are so closely linked with our soul is the thing that we're, as you've probably experienced right now, most hesitant to put out into the world because it's so vulnerable and so personal. And like you just said, like you if you could delay it even further, you would delay it because you want it to be perfect because it is like an expression of your soul. But I'm learning, so thanks for that reminder as well that you just put out to have people around you that push you and to, you know, not wait too long. There's a balance. So
Yeah, there is a balance, bro, and I will push back against it a little bit. And the reason why I'll push back against it is one of the greatest trilogies probably of cinema that we've ever experienced is the Lord of the Rings. And
mm,
I remember listening to some interviews of the actors that played Gandalf and Saruman, and they spoke about doing 30, 40, 50 takes for a single line.
wow.
not for a scene, but for a single line, until like the director was happy with them getting it just right. And
Mm,
then through the process of me writing my book, like I did 70 rewrites before I got it to a point where I was like, I'm gonna let this fly now. I feel like it's an easy thing to say, don't be a perfectionist and just put it out there. But there's also something profound around putting yourself through the gauntlet time and time again and
mm,
refining one's masterpiece so that when we put it out, like we can look back on it and say, you know what, I poured more hours into this than what I thought I would, but I'm so glad that I did.
yeah.
And like people, at least for me, I get the sense that people feel the essence of the work and where it's come from. And in a world where like being an author and like it's easy to get ghostwriting done or get ChatGPT to like write a
Mm,
whole book. For me, the greatest work was the fact that I gave this thing a whole year and
mm,
I've got so many versions of manuscripts saved and like there's nothing that puts a bigger smile on my face than that
yeah.
because I know like the cultivation that went into it. But to bring it back to you, bro, appreciate it. I'll drop the links for everything for people to reach out to you. Lots of respect, bro, for the devotion and the way that you've cultivated yourself. Really appreciate everything you've shared with us. I feel like we might have to do an episode 2 at some point because I feel like there's so
Yeah.
much more there for us to unpack. But yeah, bro,
Yeah.
really appreciate it.
Definitely, bro. If I could just finish it, one last little piece is
Go
that
for
like
it.
all this is great. And like from everything I said, like I obviously have said all these things I've done, but also it I'm not perfect and I am human, and it sounds like probably from this short episode that I'm like ultra disciplined and it has been really easy for me to commit a lot of my time. Anyone who endeavors on this, it is probably the hardest thing you will ever do. And I have gone through so many deaths and rebirths and questioning myself, if is this even worth what I'm doing or worth my time and dedicating such a large portion of my life to. But all I can say is when everything else falls apart and me having these practices to come back to is like the greatest endeavor that I've ever done, and it is worth it in the end. And just don't beat yourself up for missing a day. If you like, what I say to my students is, if you miss a day or 2 days or a week, that time that you'd spend beating yourself up about it and negative self-talking, just sit the fuck down and do your practice.
Nice. I
It'll,
was going to ask you for closing comments, but you brought it forward anyway. So thanks for that, bro. I
yeah,
feel
no
like
worries.
that's a nice cliffhanger as well for episode 2. We can dive into that theme of death and rebirth and unpack some of those conversations.
I'd love to, bro.
Epic, bro. Thank you again.
Thank you.